Hello, hope everyone's having a nice day. We're continuing with Derech Hashem, and in the name and edition we're on page 577, which is section 4, chapter 6, and starting with number 1. So until now, we've been taught this part of this section, we've been talking about the laws of davening. Not the laws of davening, but the meaning of davening. And we talked about how we're in a physical existence, and when we daven, we infuse the world with spirituality, and that a human being has two parts, has a neshama, has a soul which yearns to get close to Hashem, and has a body which is physical, and in order that let's say, level of physicality versus spirituality in the world on a normal weekly basis, on a weekday basis, let's say excluding holidays and Shabbos, the physical part of the world has the potential to overpower us. So the way that we combat that, in a sense, is we mentioned that we infuse the physical with spirituality through prayer, through davening. So that's what we talked about last time. And now the Ramchal is going to go on a little bit of a tangent and talk about the different spiritual parts of the day. We have three main parts of davening. We have 3 times a day that we daven. We have the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. So now, before the Ramchal really returns to the different parts of davening, he's going to talk about the different parts of the day. So let's see. Sidra, again, page 577 in the name and edition. Sidra Chachma Hal Yaina. Hashem set up Shatia Valayla Shlita Lakochos Hatoma, that in the evening at night, that is when the forces of evil the forces of impurity have power. God created a spiritual world in addition to a physical world, and included in the physical world, we all know about the holy spiritual forces such as angels and things like that, malachim, but there are also spiritual forces of evil called the kochos hatuma, and these kochos hatuma have their power in the evening. Lehispashik b'chol markav sehem, to spread out in through all of their carriers, v'yishotatu anfehem ba'olam, and to spread out their branches in the world. At this time, the intent was that people should be at home, sleeping in their beds. They should be sleeping and quiet and resting there until the morning. So then the spread and the force of these forces of evil, they are taken away. And then people can get up and they can go and do their work and whatever they have to do the next day. And it's what King David said, bring on darkness and its light, Tizrach Hashemesh, let the sun shine, Yetze Adam Lapalo, a person should go out to his work. Ve'ulam, Kol ha'inyanim ha'ela, b'chol gvuleim v'shiyureim, mishtarshim b'sharshi yisodos ha'anhaga. All of these rules, all of these topics which we're discussing, and the different boundaries and the different levels of these spiritual forces are something that are planted they take root in the foundations of the way that Hashem runs the world. According to the discernment and the hashpos, we talk like we mentioned in the first section of Derech Hashem, that Hashem has certain hashpos, certain spiritual energy. Well, for lack of a better term, as we mentioned many times, Rabbi Naaman doesn't translate the word hashpa. It's very difficult to translate in English. But Hashem puts his spiritual energy into the world in very specific forms. And in those very specific forms, that is how the creations come into existence, and also the creations of the forces of evil, like we mentioned, the forces of impurity. But tzarich sheteda, you have to know, even though in general we say that evening is when these impure forces have power, this is only in the first half of the night. But in midnight, and it doesn't mean midnight at 12, it means midnight, halachic midnight, when you divide the night into 12 equal parts, which is usually not at 12 a.m. After midnight, already it begins the positive hashpah, the positive energy, the forces of purity coming into the world. in all of the worlds. And it takes away the power from these forces of evil. And their branches are taken away from the places where people live. And that's when the light of the morning starts to awaken. So already the morning and the positive forces, they already start to come about from midnight. Ad shemer hayom, until the day brightens, the day comes, and the proper hashpahs come, and the whole creation is renewed. We mentioned about how every day has a different hashpah, has a different spiritual energy coming from Hashem, because there are 6,000 years of creation in this world, the world that we have now. And every single day has a different spiritual energy than the day before, because every day is necessary for the completion of the world. But what he's saying here is that even though the forces of impurity, they have their power in the evening, that's only the first half of the evening until halachic midnight. If you go to the kotel, you'll see at halachic midnight there's people that say tikkun chatzos, special prayers for the destruction of the temple. Not only at the kotel, not only at the Western Wall, but many holy people get up in the middle of the night to say these special prayers. And we're seeing that chatzos, the midnight, is when the forces of impurity cease to have their power. Now what's this whole idea? We keep talking about the forces of impurity, forces of purity, the force of impurity at night. Well, why did Hashem make it like this? The fact that they exist, they have their power in the evening, and that during the day they're not around. It's something that was set into creation this way. Besides for how it could be affected by man. What does that mean? God wanted that, with something we've talked about before in Derech Hashem, is that evil and goodness come into the world based on the actions of man, of human beings. When a person does a mitzvah, he brings forces of goodness into the world that positively affects the world, and when he does an avera, when he does a sin, God forbid, that negatively brings negative spiritual forces in the world. So since Hashem wanted it to be like that, there has to be some potential for evil to have power in the world. So that it could be that evil could spread out from these parts. Just like they could be held back. So, because evil can increase, the forces of evil can increase based on man's actions, so that it had to be already that there were forces of evil that existed in the world, so that if people would sin, that those forces of evil could increase. Now, where's the baseline that these forces of evil start out at? That's in the evening. So we said the force of evil had to have a certain place where they're there just by them independent of the actions of man. So that preparation could be that the preparation exists, that based on man's actions, that it could be that the forces of evil would be swayed through the actions of mankind. Hashem made two very strong realities, which is light and darkness. Like we explained in the first section, goodness comes from the light, and goodness comes from Hashem revealing Himself, and darkness comes about from Hashem hiding His presence, so to say. And each of these forces, light and evil, were given to a certain time. That's day and night. And this is day and night, and after this, the power of the forces of evil were given rule at the night, when darkness, because that's the time of darkness, physical darkness and spiritual darkness. Hakol hazmana letoldos hamaisim u'kmoshe zacharnu, and they are all for the effects as man's actions, meaning God created this time period of night where the forces of evil sort of independently have their power, and they can be either increased or decreased by the actions of mankind. Okay, let's do one more section. Beis v'omnam b'yosen shlita zos al kochos hara. Hashem gave power to these forces of evil. Hayela ubihis pashtam ba'olam nimtza chashko shel ha'olam misraba mischazek. We find that the darkness in the world grew and got stronger. Va'adam gam hu b'yod sheikhav v'mitaso. And when a person sleeps on his bed, gam alav mispashit his pashtos min atuma hamishotetas. So too, a person is affected by this impurity that hovers over when he's sleeping. Bashir shenatelan, a certain amount. According to the shaychus, the connection that the body of the person has, based on his physicality and Yetzirah. As we said earlier, human beings are composed of two forces, of two parts, a body which is physical, and a soul which is spiritual. And also a human being has a Yetzirah, that's a spiritual desire, a negative spiritual force to do evil. And this spiritual force, and based on the level of a person's, and based on this, that a person has this negative spiritual force, this physical side at night when he's sleeping. So the forces of evil which exist in the world are able to have some effect on the human being at night when he's sleeping. When a person's sleeping, like we mentioned in the third section, when a person's sleeping, certain parts of his neshama, not the person's entire soul, but just certain high parts of his neshama, separate from him when he's sleeping. And they taste a little bit of death. This is what the sages say, that sleep is 1/60th of death. And since that's happening, the forces of evil or darkness become more powerful on the body. When the neshama leaves, when this neshama, that the neshama is what purifies the body and what cleanses the body from its physicality. So when a person's sleeping, parts of the soul, parts of the neshama leave him or her, and therefore the forces of evil which are present at night, the darkness, has an effect on man, has a stronger effect because his soul, parts of his soul are not there to purify him. There's more of an entranceway, an opening for the tumah to come. This is what we call ruach ra. That it says that when a person sleeps, one of the reasons he has to wash his hands is because there's a ruach ra, a spiritual impurity that lies on his hands when he's sleeping. This is where it comes from. And it comes on the hands, but nowhere else. Because this is the level which Hashem saw to be fit that the force of impurity would have on a person when he sleeps. Okay, so just to summarize, we're saying that there are two forces in the world. There's a force of good, a love, light, which comes from Hashem's revealing himself, and then there's a force of darkness, which is called choshech. And then there's something, choshech or tumah. And the tumah, the place where tumah exists, or is primarily exists, is in the first half of the evening. And the reason the tumah has to be there is because God wanted that the spiritual forces of good and evil, of tumah and or and choshech, should be affected by man, by human beings. When human beings do the right thing, there's more light in the world, and when they do the wrong thing, there's more darkness. Now, what is this ruach ra, the spirit, a spirit of impurity that lies on a person when he's sleeping, that he has to wash his hands when he gets up in the morning? That's because when a person sleeps, the higher levels of his neshama, of his soul, part of his soul, detach from him, and it's once considered 1/60th of death. Therefore, his body, which is more related to the physicality, overpowers it to some degree, and there's a level of impurity which rests on the hands. And with that, next week we'll continue with this topic and talk about how all this relates to davening and the other mitzvos that we do in the morning. Wish everyone a beautiful day.